3. All right, shalom, shalom, everybody.
Shalom.
I am here with a very, very special guest. I actually met him and his wife just yesterday at the Creation Science Museum. It's kind of cool how I met them. His wife, just a few days ago, was putting a comment underneath my video saying, hey, my husband's trying to reach out to you. And I'm like, I don't see the email. They've been subscribers of mine for about a month. But anyway, they heard that I was going to be at the Creation Science Museum, and they stalked me. No. They found me at the Creation Science Museum. We wound up having a really, really good talk. They're both Messianic believers just like I am, so we immediately had a kinship. And this gentleman, John, he has been an officer, police officer, a cop for a good 20 years?
40
years, excuse me. 40 years. But it's only been recently that he sort of transitioned to actually centering on arresting pedophiles. And so we're going to get into a lot of that today. For some reason, my camera, my app is not connecting to the internet. So if we go beyond 30 minutes, I'll just walk up and click the button, and we'll do a second part as well. But we'll see how much we can get in these next 30 minutes. So without further ado, we're going to start this interview. So John, I'd like you to start off by saying, give us a little bit about your background and what has motivated you or driven you to this position where you're really wanting to go after these pedophiles.
Well, my background, I grew up locally here in San Diego. Had a little bump in the road with law enforcement. Ended up in the military, and this is the early 70s when all this started. Did my military service in the mid 70s, and because I had a couple of law enforcement run-ins as a kid, I remembered who mentored me growing up, and at one time I had a juvenile court judge tell me it was either the military or incarceration, so I took the latter of the two. Became interested in police work at an early age. Decided to apply for the police academy here in San Diego, and I was sworn in 1980.
Wow.
After I was in the military for 4 years. So my background, I have no police law enforcement in my family, had no influence other than the street cops that used to harass me and pick on me and my friends. So when I went into law enforcement, I kind of thought I had a little bit of balance there. I'd been on both sides of the fence a little bit, so to speak. So what I usually gravitated to was investigations. I worked hard to get out of the street. I spent 12 years pushing a police car around. Then I got an opportunity to go into investigations. I started out working juvenile procedures. Imagine that, you know. I did a little stint in property crimes, and then I went into person crimes, and from there I went to sexual assault cases. And that's where a little background on me. I came from an abusive background, a dysfunctional family, and we had neighbors who were babysitters, and I'll just leave it like that. I'm passionate about, in the back of my mind, I knew what I always wanted to do, and that was to make a difference in somebody's life and help them become a survivor. So I kind of gravitated into the sexual assault thing. I absorbed everything that they wanted to teach me. I'd been flown halfway across the country to seminars, and to this day I still belong to a organization that wants to end violence against women, which includes the pedophilia and child abuse. And their organization is called End Violence Against Women. It's an absolute great organization. So that's kind of my background, and then into the sexual assault area. Occasionally I would get a case involving pedophilia when I was a San Diego police detective in the sex crimes unit. An example would be we had a child that was just going into middle school, and the math teacher was the perpetrator in that case. And the math teacher was a pedophile and targeted this little girl and stayed with her throughout her middle school years. Then when she was going to high school, he transferred to the local high school. Now this is a sick individual. He was grooming her the whole time without her parents knowing about it, providing her with monetary gifts, just keeping in her life the whole time. And these people that are pedophiles, they thrive on that kind of conduct. That's been my experience when I've interviewed them. So this girl goes on to high school, and she ultimately ends up marrying this pedophile.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, and I don't hear about all of this until one of the children is molested by the pedophile, and this child disclosed to her best friend's mom, and we're talking about a 9-year-old. And there was multiple kids in the family. He had had several children with his former student. That's one example of a case that I've been exposed to in that. And as strange as it is, you have to realize that that exists in a community. That exists in every walk of society. It's not always a teacher. It could be your gym coach, your football, baseball coach, soccer coach. It can be somebody that children look up to outside the family.
And are they, because a lot of people think it's just men. Are they men and women that are doing this?
There are women, and the one case that comes to mind right off the bat that you bring up, we had junior high kids again. We had a tutor/neighbor that would fill in as the babysitter when mom had to work 2 jobs. And she ended up introducing the minor to alcohol and ultimately seduced him. And what's he do as a young teenager? He brags to his buddies.
Right.
Okay? And we're talking a 13 and 14-year-old kid
Right.
bragging to his buddies about what he did. And one of the other buddies disclosed to his mom, who then called the authorities, and I ended up with that particular case, and she was convicted.
Wow. So I'm going to turn off this fan because I just want to make sure it's not causing any other sounds. So I don't want you to go into detail on this, but basically when you reference the babysitters in your childhood, so you are a survivor yourself.
I'm a survivor
Okay.
/ former victim.
Okay, so let's talk about what you've been doing recently. It's been the last 2 to 3 years, right? That you've
Correct.
been. Okay,
Yes,
so share with us maybe just a couple, like the ones that you were sharing with me yesterday at the museum about the guy that you.
Yeah, I left the city of San Diego as an investigator / detective with a pension the day I was hired by another jurisdiction as a district attorney investigator. And I've been in that capacity for 11 years. So if you add the 11 onto the 28, plus I had a little military experience with law enforcement, it's almost 40 years. So I go to this jurisdiction and I start working as a elder abuse investigator, and then ultimately within the past couple of years I moved into what they call the SACA unit, which is the child abuse sexual assault unit, and Special Victims 1 they call it. Since I've been in that unit, my wife and I attend, to bring up this one incident, my wife and I go to a Bible study. At that time we were doing 2 Bible studies a week, and then go to our church on Saturday. And while we were there, on one particular occasion at the Bible study, a gentleman we had not seen before, and this is a group of about 12 to 15 individuals. He'd come in, he's dressed kind of like the way I am today. He was in a suit, and he'd come from his place of employment, and it was a local Christian university that this individual worked at. He had made his way into our study group for several weeks, and after a couple of months, he was dating one of the single moms who had brought her young daughter, we're talking under the age of 9, to the study group, and everybody knew who they were, and they were welcome there. And he was a fast mover, and I had the hairs on my neck, that sixth sense that you hear cops talk about. I had these hairs raised on my neck because I observed a couple things after a couple of weeks. First, the couple would sit together, and the daughter would be to the left of mom. Mm-hmm. After a couple of weeks, the daughter's sitting between the two. Mm-hmm. And after about a month, he's running his fingers through her hair. And I had told my wife on day 1 when I had seen this guy, and it's an ability that I have after talking to so many people that have committed sexual assaults, including the pedophiles and the serial rapists out there. I said, I don't have a good feeling. And I'm in a Bible study group, and I really just felt uncomfortable saying that, so on the way home I said, hey, look, there's something up with this individual. Well, what happened one day, our sponsor of the Bible study group came up and said, "Hey, did you hear about so-and-so?" And I had not heard anything yet. But our office, ironically, was going to be getting this case involving a in-house molest. This individual had married the mother. They became a couple, and he was taking on the role as stepfather.
Right.
The whole time mom was at work, he was molesting the child. And in those kind of cases, it's not uncommon for single mothers to be targeted by pedophiles because of their children. And sometimes the children, in my case, you had a fear of disclosing because, you would be taken from your parents or living in a foster home or whatever. So this particular case was coming to our office. And the way I found out about it was through my Bible study, that it was coming to our office because he had been arrested at his place of employment. So when I go back to my office, my attorney that I work for is the assigned prosecutor to one of our Bible study members.
Oh my goodness.
So there was a conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
And I had to come forward and say, "Hey, look, I cannot work on this case." So I monitored it from the outside. Now, this woman was real strong in the Messianic faith. In fact, they blew the shofar in the parking lot during the beginning of the jury trial. It was hard for me not to go out there with my prayer cloth and stand there and announce my faith and do that.
You say you fake and phony.
Exactly, and have the conflict of interest, that you would if they found out that I was in the Bible study, and the defense attorney wanted to make a big deal about that. So it was best I had to break off all contact, and Shannon and I couldn't even go back to the Bible study. That would just present itself more problems. So that was an interesting case, and that was the more recent one that I've been involved in indirectly. Now, after the case resolved, I introduced myself to the family again, and the mother, and she knew me, and she knows my wife, Shannon, and we ended up being supportive of her and providing her with victim advocacy and also counseling for both her and her daughter. So those are the kind of things that I'm passionate about, and have still felt like going to work and doing that type of work for the Lord, because it's a calling I have. It's not just because I'm a cop or an investigator or a detective. I know from being a victim and a survivor that I'm not ready to quit doing this yet. And people my age, I'm 63, people my age are either retired and working for themselves or doing other jobs. I still feel passionate about helping children and doing the right thing and protecting those victims. And I've involved myself in community-based agencies.
And is this particular individual, this guy, is he sitting in jail right
Yes,
now?
Yes, he is. He got 35 years to life.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah, brother.
Amen. So guys, I want to bring something up that just came to my mind. The Messianic movement has a lot of good truth, right? It's basically uncovering the Hebrew Jewish roots of the Christian faith. But there's also a lot of strange fire going on in this movement because Satan hates it. So there are, for instance, men within the Messianic movement, I've even run into them, where they believe in marrying multiple wives, okay? They're trying to adopt polygamy. Yahshua put a stop to that when he quoted Genesis in fact, by the 1st century, the Jews were not practicing polygamy, had not practiced it for about a good 400 years, okay? So there are men who are trying to use, we're going to do Torah and stuff. It's a sick sexual perversion that's been creeping in. And I'm not saying the whole Messianic movement, I'm saying different parts. So I just want to put that warning out there. It's very good to uncover the Hebrew Jewish roots of the Christian faith, which is what my website's all dedicated to. But you need to be aware that there's Kabbalah, there's witchcraft, there's all sorts of strange fire, because the Messianic movement's not a denomination, it's a prophetic movement. So one Messianic congregation could be completely different from the other. So if you go to some of these congregations or these home groups, you got to really have discernment. Really have discernment. You got to be armed with discernment. In fact, you got to be armed with discernment no matter what. But I just want to put that out there real quickly. Okay, I would like you to talk about what you were mentioning before this interview about some of the satanic pedophilia, witchcraft, coven things that you've been seeing in the area.
Yes, my exposure to that has been both as a patrol officer and a young detective going back several years in San Diego. As a patrol officer, you work around the clock, And there was a time where I patrolled a community park, and I would see these juveniles, such as myself growing up, out late at night. And some of them were under the influence of different types of drugs. Specifically in those days it was methamphetamine, and even today it's an issue. I would stop and make contact with these people, and some of the kids were not just runaways, they were throwaways. And I had people in the community saying they're into heavy metal music, for example. And not to say that that's bad, but heavy metal music associated with methamphetamine, being a throwaway or runaway in a park late at night, you're looking for a victim. What a perfect place to send one of your neighborhood coven trolls into a park to lure these people in for sex, drugs, and a little bit of rock and roll. Well, I knew several teenagers in the community where I worked in San Diego at the time that got themselves in over their heads and started being introduced to Satanism and some of the rituals that associate with that. Had them tell me about animal sacrifices. Wearing goth clothing, for example, is something easy to do, but it also separates you from other people, and you start involving yourself in the drug practicing, and it drops your inhibitions and allows you to do things that pedophiles in satanical covens, specifically witches and some of the high priests in these covens, can get you to do. Can manipulate you, can get you doing animal sacrifices. And I've also read and studied that some of these covens, and some in San Diego, where some of the witches have breeders within their coven, so they can do in-house births, and these children aren't even known that they sacrifice. That's some of the exposure that I had, and it was real big in San Diego in the early 80s, mid 80s, with some of the awareness that had come, and some of it from across the border. And I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this word right, but it was kind of a little bit of Catholicism in Santeria. There was a cemetery where I worked one time down at the border, and I was telling my wife this the other day. We got a call that somebody was mutilating animals at this old community. Imagine a residential area where there's old tombstones, dating back to the 1800s. Well, it's no bigger than a city block, and it's chain linked in, and there's weeds growing over. So we go out there to see what was going on, and we found all these black roosters that had been dismembered. Their heads were cut off, and there's blood splatter everywhere. But we learned later it was some kind of ritual based on the local community and some of the people that belonged to this coven out there, and they were doing a sacrifice out there. What they did, I couldn't tell you, but we never found the heads to the black chickens. There was about 6 of them out there, if I remember. So I've had a little bit of exposure to that type of activity. You have to be aware of that, because some of these places, in my experience, they'll have an altar, to Lucifer, and they'll have the black candle wax, and they'll have the 9-foot rope circle, and they'll have the runaways and throwaways soldiering for the community. And that their purpose is to recruit and to move through their evilness through